Hey, real quick before we start the podcast, if you have listened to more than one episode, can you do me a favor and rate and review the show? Now, I'm not big on asking for favors, but we really want to get this podcast listed in the top of all health and fitness podcasts, not just the fitness category. This will take you less than a minute, and if you could do that, that would make us friends forever. And since we refuse all sponsors on the show, this will be my only ask rather than telling you to go check out some supplement or product we don't actually believe in, like every other podcast out there. So please rate and review. Okay, that's it. To the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Garage Gym Athlete Podcast. Jerred Moon here. Just me today. I want to talk about Zone 2. I've been getting a lot of questions about it. So first things first, I want you to know what you're getting yourself into by listening to this episode today. I am not getting into as much science on Zone 2. I've already done that. If you want to go back, scroll through our feed, a couple years ago, I did a podcast called How to Burn Fat. And really, that's like our Zone 2 primer episode on like the science of this stuff. So we're talking about mitochondrial efficiency, fat oxidation. If you really want to nerd out on those things, you absolutely can. You can go listen to that episode. Today, I just want to tell you how to become an aerobic monster, an aerobic beast. You know, how to build that aerobic base so you can go harder at the hard intensities, right? That's a big one, but you can also run forever, have the faster Murph times, all of that stuff. So there's a lot of benefits to Zone 2. I'm going to try and stay away from the science today and just give you practical application. So my journey with Zone 2 started quite a ways back. I was just trying to learn how to train more efficiently for things, but I've done a lot of events over the years, endurance events. And my primary reason for doing events back in the day had nothing to do with me wanting to be an endurance athlete. I've always considered myself more of a strength athlete. I've always done concurrent training, but I've always considered myself more of a strength athlete. And so what I wanted to do when I would do these endurance events was I wanted to meet myself. I wanted physical pain. I wanted to push myself. So I would sign up for these ridiculous events completely untrained, so that I did a marathon untrained. I did 2 100-mile bike races untrained. I've done more 100-mile bike races than that, but I did 2 of them completely untrained on bikes you shouldn't even be riding. I've done Spartan races that were like 17 miles. Again, I don't want to call those necessarily untrained, but from an aerobic standpoint, definitely was untrained. And I used to sign up for those things just to push myself, just to meet myself, understand a little bit more about who I was when I got tired, when I felt hurt, like all of those kind of things. But as you get older, that's not really that fun to do. Like, you learn those things. I think it's good to push yourself. I'm not backing up on any of those kind of things. I'm just saying at some point you're like, what? Can I actually get better at this? Can I actually build an aerobic base to where this is more of an enjoyable process than just signing up untrained and basically killing yourself? What I did, my first real bout was my third time that I did a 100-mile bike race. I was like, after I finished that second one, I was like, I can't do this again. Like, if I'm going to do this race again, I'm going to actually train for it. And I did. I trained for it. I put in a lot of Zone 2 work intentionally, just because I knew that's how I would build the aerobic base. And I put in a lot of Zone 2 work, did a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today, like prescriptions, loading, building up to these kind of things, built my aerobic base, and I had a massive PR. I don't even remember how much of a PR it was, but it was crazy because the previous 2 years, I had finished a bike race in about how long you would think it would take someone to do 100 miles who hadn't been on a bike at all that year. Like, it took me forever. But the third year, I'd put a lot of time building up my aerobic base and more time on the bike. So I PR'd by several hours, and it felt good. It was actually more of an enjoyable experience. Other than the heat, it was an enjoyable experience. And then also the recovery was next to nothing. Like, I was good to go back, like, training really by the next day. Maybe I took that next day off, but then I was back at it the day after that, just training. And normally when I would do these events, I'd have to take a week off because of how much it would destroy my body. So you really just don't, it's not an enjoyable process to have to redline yourself through these kind of things. And so I want to talk about building up your aerobic base today a little bit more and how to go about it. So building up your aerobic base is what we do in Zone 2 training. So zone 2 training is this lower threshold training. It's 60 to 70% of your max heart rate is where the zone comes from. But it's training in this zone to build up your, again, I'm trying not to get into science stuff. It's just to build up your aerobic capacity. Let's put it at that. Your body better utilizes different fuel substrates at this zone, like fat oxidation, but ultimately we're just trying to build up more aerobic capacity by training more zone 2. So I just promised myself I wouldn't get into the science, so I'm trying not to. So we're just doing more zone 2 to build up our aerobic base. But there's a lot of debate about, okay, where is zone 2? What is it? One way that you could find your zone 2, and this is the way I don't recommend, you could get a lactate meter. They cost a couple $100. You can get them on Amazon. You can spend, I think it's like close to $10 per testing strip. And then you can dive in and you can test your lactate. And then you can see if your lactate's within the reference range for zone 2 while you're on a treadmill. You pretty much have to be on a treadmill because you're going to be testing your lactate. It's going to be harder to do on a run, and you probably need another person to help you. So you could use this lactate meter. And the reason that this is like the gold standard for zone 2, if you really wanted to find it out, was there's some scientific studies that you say basically if you're untrained, your body switches to burning carbohydrates faster as opposed to burning fat. And then at the same time, your body starts to produce a lot more lactate more quickly. This is especially if you're like really out of shape. But those athletes who are really well trained, that doesn't happen. They still produce lactate, but it's much later. They don't get as fatigued, and they use a little bit more fat oxidation at these lower intensities. They're burning more fat, then they switch to carbs later on. So it's just, you want to be healthier and fitter. So you can do these lactate meters to see where that's happening for you, because they even say that some people, like, if you're really untrained, you might technically not have a zone 2. And what that means is like this, almost the second you switch to exercise, you're so out of shape that your body is immediately utilizing carbohydrate and you start producing more lactate to where you don't even truly have a zone 2. Most people listening to this, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a zone 2, so it's not something that I would worry about. You'd have to have like metabolic syndrome to be in the case where you don't truly have a zone 2 at all. I will be doing an actual lactate meter test here in the next couple weeks on the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and go do that, but I'll be walking you through all the different ways to test zone 2. But I want to talk more practically about how you can think about doing zone 2 and how to calculate it the best for yourself. Because when you get into zone 2, the reason a lot of people have trouble with it is because they'll be like, how on earth do you run in zone 2? This is anytime someone's new to zone 2 training. Like, they're like, it would be impossible for me to go run and keep my heart rate within 60 to 70% of my max heart rate and be running. Like, you might have to walk, right? The first thing I say to that is, one, that absolutely could be true. Maybe you just need to put in some more time. But the caveat to that is, like, what are you calculating as your zone 2? So I'm going to take a 40-year-old as an example here. How most people are calculating it and how most of your heart rate monitors that you're wearing, you might want to look into your specific device and see how it's calculating it. But most of them are just using this simple formula of 220 minus your age is your maximum heart rate, right? So if you were 40 years old and we did 220 minus 40, you'd be at 180 beats per minute as your max. So now if I'm calculating 60 to 70% of that, your zone 2 would technically be within this range of 108 beats per minute to 126 beats per minute, which is pretty low, especially if you're a trained athlete. Like, even if you've been training your whole life and I say that's your zone 2, you still might have trouble running and not getting above 126. That's fairly low. And that's not the method that I use to calculate zone 2. The method I use is the MAF method. So the MAF method I'm going to walk you through, but it was actually created by Phil Maffetone, and MAF stands for maximum aerobic function. That's the one that I utilize, and I also recommend all of our athletes utilize, because to me, Phil Maffetone actually worked with a lot of triathletes. He also has a lot of science behind it, and he helped people get fitter, like building their aerobic base, by what we're talking about. And so this is the best method and the one I've used to get faster run times, get faster cycling times. Like at least you have the N=1 experiment here and experience that I know the MAF method works for getting faster in these different heart rate zones. Going back to a person 40 years old, the example, the MAF method is super easy to calculate. You don't worry about your max heart rate. All you do is take 180 as the baseline number and you subtract your age. So the fact that 180 happened to be the max heart rate over here with a 40-year-old is just a coincidence. So just ignore that. So say you're 30 years old and you'd say 180 minus 30, right? So for the 40-year-old, what we would do is 180 minus 40. So now we're at 140 beats per minute. So that is your MAF number, your maximum aerobic function number. That's like your zone 2 number that we're looking to stay within. Okay, so it's not even a range. It's like I'm trying to stay around 40, like 140, let's say plus or minus 2 beats per minute. That's where I'm trying to stay if I was 40 years old. Now, that's quite a bit higher than a max of 126. So if you're at 140 beats per minute versus 126, that might be the difference between a brisk walk and a slow jog. Oh, I actually, if I'm allowed to go up to 140, yeah, maybe I could run. So that's where you want to start. I recommend all athletes use the MAF method. So I'm going to actually walk you through everything, like what he has on his website real quick. It won't take but a minute, but that way, if you don't want to look it up yourself and you just want to listen to this episode, you'll know exactly how to calculate it because there are some asterisks to this equation. So the MAF 180 formula for determining your MAF heart rate. So subtract your age from 180, then modify from one of the categories below. So category 1, if you have or are recovering from a major illness like heart disease, any operation or hospital stay, or if you're in rehabilitation, are on any regular medication, or are in stage 3, chronic, overtraining, burnt out, subtract 10. Okay, so if you had to answer basically yes to any of those things, you're in that category, and you had 140 as your number, you would subtract 10 and go down to 130. That's category A. Category B, if you are injured, have regressed or not improved in training, such as poor MAF test or competition, if you're getting more than 2 colds or flu or other infections per year, have seasonal allergies or asthma, are over fat, are in stage 1 or stage 2 of overtraining, or if you have been inconsistent, just starting, or just getting back into training, subtract an additional 5. Okay, so now you'd subtract another 5 if you had to answer yes to those questions, and you'd be at 125. So you'd be even lower than the normal zone 2. You'd be more in the calculated zone 2. Now, category C, if you have been training consistently at least 4 times per week for up to 2 years without any of the problems mentioned in A or B, no modification is necessary. Use 180 minus your age as your MAF heart rate. And then category D, if you have been training for more than 2 years without any of the problems listed above, have made progress in your MAF tests, which you can go deeper down the MAF rabbit hole if you want, improved competitively and are without injury, add 5. Okay, so you can add 5 to it. You could even go up to 145 if you can say yes to those things. Now, there are some exemptions, and these are the last 2 things. The MAF 180 formula may need to be further individualized for athletes over the age of 65. So if you're over 65 listening to this, the math might not work out. Because if you've been honestly training, let's just say you started when you were 30 years old and you've been training and you are now 67, you're probably in pretty good shape. So 67-year-olds can wildly differ. And so you just want to make sure that you are making the appropriate adjustments. You might be able to go up. It might be dependent on like doing an actual max heart rate test or like just doing some of these MAF tests, things like that. Continuing. For some, up to 10 beats may have to be added for those only in category D of the formula. So category D was the one where you've made all the progress and all that other stuff. This does not mean that 10 should be added automatically, but that an honest self-assessment should be made. And then the last bullet for athletes 16 years of age and under, the formula is not applicable. Rather, a MAF heart rate of 165 has been used. So if you're super young, don't even try to do it. Just use 165. So you see how this can vary too. So if you're really fit, you've been training for more than 2 years, you've had none of the problems that were mentioned, you've made progress in MAF tests or aerobic tests, zone 2 tests, you've improved competitively and you're without injury, you can add 5 or even up to 10. So this 40-year-old that I'm using in this example might even be able to go up to 150 for their MAF zone. You can add 10. And so that's good to know because now you're like getting within this range. I think for most people, just going like 180 minus your age is the best bet. But you can even go up a little bit from that if you're really fit. I mean, you've had a great last 2 years in consistency. But if you have some of these other ones where it's, you know what, I haven't been that consistent, I do get sick quite a bit, I'm not as healthy as I should be, you have to be really honest with yourself. You might have to subtract some numbers here. And so those are things I want people to know on MAF as well, because another reason MAF might not work for you is because maybe you've only ever heard 180 minus your age, but you didn't really dive further into the MAF formula or how it worked, and you didn't know that, oh, I might have to subtract or go a little bit slower. So this is the method I recommend for every athlete, because not only does it give you a better baseline, 140 versus 126 for this 40-year-old, it also has more caveats that personalize it to you to where it's, oh yeah, I get sick or whatever, I'm going to bump it down. Or you know what, I've basically been in perfect condition for the last 2 years, I'm going to bump it up. And now we have a more personalized approach to getting a zone 2 heart rate. Because if I tried to just run in specifically like zone 2, it just wouldn't, I could probably still do like a light jog, but I'd be basically doing a glorified run. Just like shuffling my feet, but it would not be actual running. It'd be walking speed and I look like I'm running. And so getting the appropriate heart rate is very important for doing any of the zone 2 stuff. So that's the staple here. Stay away from, don't worry about lactate meters. Like I'm going to do that and show people how to do that on the YouTube channel in the next couple of weeks. But I would say it's not important. It's not something that I think is worth the $200 to $300 for the meter and then the $10 strip every time you want to test it. And again, these things aren't good forever. Like it has everything to do with what your current fitness level is. So if you take a break or if you change training or if you change your mind or you're not doing as much volume, it can change. So I think a better and easier way to go about it is just to do the MAF formula. Now I want to talk a little bit more about my prescriptions and how I've been loading my cardio, my run volume over the last couple weeks, because I technically started back in May. And again, this is not my first rodeo in doing zone 2 training and actually improving by using zone 2 training. We've been using it for a long time at Garage Gym Athlete. I've used it specifically to get better at race events. So this is not, oh, here's my experience from May. This is years of experience, but here's what I've been doing since May. So I knew I wanted to start running again after having coming back from my back injury. And I want to get better. I want to improve Murph times and next Memorial Day, all those kind of things. And I was like, well, I'm going to have to start running again to increase my aerobic base, make this workout a little bit easier, get my run times back down, get them faster. And so I wanted to increase the mileage. So what I did though, how I increased my mileage is I only started running around 5 miles per week. And that's it. I would break that up too. I might do 3 miles in zone 2, and then 2 miles, I might do 2 other 1 mile faster runs, something like that. Typically, I'm trying to keep about 80% of my run volume in zone 2. And I tried to keep to that as much as formulaic as I could. And so I started back in May with only 5 miles. And then each week I would just add a little bit more, with my goal getting up to 20, which is where I'm at now, but it took a while. So I went from 5 miles per week to then jumping up to 6.5, and then 7, and then 8, 9. Like I just went very slow in adding this volume. And this is one of my biggest recommendations, because sometimes when I hear zone 2 recommendations, the number you'll hear thrown around a lot is that you should just do 3 hours per week or something like that, which is fine. Like, that's a fine amount of zone 2. I don't necessarily disagree with that. But if you take someone who hasn't been doing much training at all, or running or cycling or whatever your sport or activity is, and then you add 3 hours, you could very quickly end up with overuse injuries. If that's just not an activity you've been doing. Like, running is notorious for that. Like, everyone thinks that they can run and just throw in some mileage. But if you go from nothing to 3 hours per week of running, you'll probably get injured. And so I say ignore the zone 2 stuff for a while. Like, you can stay there if you want. Not like being in zone 2. I'm talking about like the zone 2 ultimate prescriptions of I want to be in zone 2 this much per week. I'm saying ignore all that big stuff and just worry about, I'm going to add a little bit of mileage until I get up to my goal. And you can increase anywhere 10, 15% per week, something like that, until you get to where you want to be. And so I went super slow. And then once I started to get baselines. I realized I did a 5-mile run and I was super slow. Like, I want everybody to know that too. I was incredibly slow. It took me almost an hour to do, pretty much it did take me an hour to do my first 5-mile zone 2 run whenever I did that, like back in May. And this is honestly the worst I've been at running in a long time. And I was like, wow, I have a lot of work to do. And so ultimately, took me an hour to do 5 miles, but that very quickly came down with adding zone 2 training as frequently as I was doing. Then it came down to where I could do 6 miles in the same amount of time that I could do 5 miles. And now I got 6 miles under an hour. I'll probably add a 7th mile. And so this is how I'm doing my prescriptions. And so what happens though is it takes a solid 8 to 12 weeks to actually start to build any aerobic endurance or efficiency here. And that's another thing I want people to know, is that if you're doing like slow add of volume, like 5 miles a week, 6 miles a week, 7 miles a week, and then you are also wanting to get better at your zone 2, it takes a long time. It's not, okay, in 3 weeks I should see some improvement. You might not see any improvement, like any at all, for 8 full weeks, maybe 12. But then it will start to clip off. Now, other things that you need to pay attention to in zone 2, because it's your heart rate, right? Like, a lot of things are dependent on heart rate. You have to take into account temperature, because if I were to go run in Texas right now, I know everyone's having a pretty rough summer, but like, it's 108, 109 degrees in the middle of the day where I live right now. So when I wake up in the morning, it's about 82, 83 degrees. So my runs have been in the morning, and I typically prefer to work out in the afternoon, but I can't run in zone 2 when it's 109 degrees outside. I can barely walk and stay in zone 2 when it's 109 degrees and the sun is just bearing down on me. So temperature is a huge factor here, and it can't be overlooked. Like, once the humidity drops, November, December timeframe, and it really cools off in Texas and I'm running in 60 degree weather, I'm going to just be PRing everything. I'm going to feel super fast because I'm able to allow myself to run faster and stay in zone 2. And that's going to be a really fun time period. This is something that always happened when I would do my Murph runs, or when I would do Murph every single week. My worst Murph times were always in the summer, but I was gaining that fitness of doing it in the summer, doing all that hyperthermic conditioning, and then when it would get cooler, I'd go a lot faster. So pay attention to the temperature. It also might want to be something that you like log. Like, I use a Garmin, and Garmin will automatically log the weather for you, especially if you're doing like an outdoor GPS run. And I actually look at that, especially if I PR. If I PR, I want to know, was it like 7 degrees cooler? Was it warmer? Was it about the same? Because I don't want to PR just because the temperature is different. In my most recent PR, it was actually 4 degrees warmer. Humidity was about the same, but I actually just legitimately PR'd. And so that was like very encouraging PR, because I'm like, okay, there was no other outside factor. I am just actually getting fitter here. And so paying attention to temperature is huge. The other thing that you need to pay attention to is elevation gain or loss. Obviously, if you're going up a hill, you're going to have to work a lot harder. And going down a hill, you don't have to work as hard. So when I leave my house, I'm basically running downhill. It's downhill for the first mile. So I'm just like, I'm cooking it. Like I'm just running really fast and I'm in zone 2. But then I start to go uphill after that dip happens, and then I got to come back through all that. When I come back on my last mile, if I'm running 6 miles, so from mile 5 to mile 6, I'm basically going all uphill, and I'm running incredibly slow, like super slow to maintain zone 2. And the reason I'm saying all this is because people always ask me questions around these kind of things. Okay, well, what do you do if you come to a hill, or what about temperature and those kind of things? I just stay in zone 2. That's the answer to that. If I'm going up a hill, I go slow enough to where I maintain zone 2. I don't care how slow it is. If I have to walk, I'll walk as slow as I can because I just want to be in that MAF heart rate zone for me and stay there for as long as I possibly can. And so that's what I'll do anytime I come up on a hill. If I'm running down a hill, I'll run faster to maintain zone 2 if I have to. And then I'm paying attention to the temperature. And those are the main things that you want to be looking out for. And the fact that you can maintain this heart rate no matter what is going to be the most beneficial thing. Now, getting into just an actual prescription, I hit on it before. Like it took me an hour when I first started to run 5 miles in zone 2. And then that quickly came down. That's my goal. A lot of people are asking me about my mileage prescriptions. Like 20 miles a week is not some magical number for me. The reason it's my number right now is because it's taking me about an hour to run 6 miles. And so I want to be 6 miles in zone 2. So I want to stay in zone 2 about an hour 3 times per week. So that's what I'm going for. It has nothing to do with this magical 20 miles per week. That's where it landed for me, but it hasn't been at 20 forever. And I don't know how long I'll be here. Like I said, my 6 mile times are just now clipping below an hour. So that means I'm about to increase it to 7, which is just going to add 3 more miles to my weekly total. So I'm not exercising any more in duration, because the duration I'm going for, I'm adding more mileage, but I'm exercising the same amount of time. So I am trying to get at least 3 hours of just zone 2 work per week. And that should be the goal. Like I said, if you're working up to this, that's not your goal right now. Your goal is just to get some mileage. You can practice and experiment with zone 2, but just get the mileage. Make sure that your joints are good, everything's good, and you're good to go. That way you're not getting any overuse injuries or anything like that. But then after you're good there, that's why I'm programming what I'm programming. There's no magic to 6 miles. There's no magic to 5 miles, 4 miles, 20 miles a week, 30 miles a week. I'm just trying to stay in zone 2 3 times per week for an hour. And so that for me right now is about 6 miles. It's about to be 7 miles. 7 miles each run. And then one other day, I'm not doing zone 2 at all. I'm doing zone 4 typically. And that's when I'm at the track. So I'm running 4 days per week. And when I'm at the track, my ultimate goal is to get my mile times faster, not just to have better zone 2 runs. I'm building the zone 2 runs up. I'm building my aerobic base so my top end can be better and I can be faster and I can recover more quickly. And so that's ultimately what I'm trying to do, is do more speed work at the track. So I'll do a lot of zone 4, a lot of 400 repeats. I'm experimenting with some 800 meter repeats and these kind of things, but that's what I'm doing my 4th running day. And I actually don't care about the heart rate zone at all. I'm telling you that it's in zone 4, but I don't care that it's in zone 4. I'm just trying to work on speed work. Because again, if all you ever did was zone 2, that would be great. It's good for your health, but for performance, you wouldn't be making a lot of progress. You still have to go see the top ends. And I said that recently on a podcast, and I've always said that is if you want to play at the top end, you have to see the top end. Like you can't just do 2 years worth of zone 2 work, never once work on any speed, and then all of a sudden you're a fast runner. Like you might get some of your longer runs faster, but you're not going to be a top end speed faster runner. Like you have to go sprint and practice utilizing those muscles and that activity to be able to do that. And so that's what my training looks like right now and how I'm loading it. So the reason I'm at the 6 miles 3 times per week has everything to do with how long I want to stay in zone 2, which is 3 hours per week, a 4th day of doing some speed work, and then the rest of the time I'm doing strength work, calisthenics, which I've talked about in depth. So that's everything I have on zone 2, how to calculate it for you, how to progress if you're thinking about adding more zone 2 training. But ultimately, this stuff is pretty simple. Endurance training takes forever to get better at. That's one thing I always like for people to know is you can get stronger. You can lift more week to week pretty easily. Aerobic efficiency is not the same animal. Like, it takes forever to knock these things down. Like, I remember when I was doing it on the bike race, training for the bike race, it took a solid 3 months before anything got noticeably improved. So that's about what you can expect when you're doing this stuff. But I still believe that this Zone 2 PRs are the greatest test of fitness out there. Because if you're capping what my heart rate's going to be at, and you're capping the distance I'm going to run, and you say, hey, your heart rate has to be this, and the distance has to be this, how are you going to run faster? You can't just try harder. You can't just go a little bit faster. It's not a who can endure the most pain. It's how much fitter can I get? So it's a true test of fitness to improve a Zone 2 metric. And probably more so than anything else, because I know when I've PR'd like a mile before, I've even thought in the back of my head, did I just try harder that time? Like, say you did a 15-second PR, which is great or whatever, but was I really just trying that much harder, or am I that much fitter? And if it's a smaller PR, if it's like a 4-second PR, 3-second PR, you're like, I think I may have, that's it. Like, all I did was try a little bit harder, push myself a little bit harder. And that's great. That's a good skill to have, but that's not truly improving your fitness. Not truly improving your fitness. I feel so much more accomplished when I hit a Zone 2 PR and I know, hey, I spent as much time as I should have in the appropriate zone. My heart rate is capped, my distance is capped, but I'm getting faster. And it's cool because some of my run times now are like 15 minutes improved from when I started just 3 months ago. And that's awesome to see. And there's only one way that happens, and that is that your fitness actually improved. And that's my favorite thing about Zone 2 training. So hopefully you took something out of this, a little bit more about how to program this for yourself. If you are one of our athletes, you Zone 2 training quite frequently in our programming. We do it in our deload weeks. We have some more on the Endure track if you're interested in getting more into the weeds with this stuff. As always, if you want to follow along with my journey, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at EO3Fit. I pretty much post my workouts most every day now. So if you have any questions, you can always hit me up there as well. For anyone who's looking to get involved with our training, a little bit more science-backed programming that most people out there, most companies, most programming companies just aren't looking into. They're not trying hard enough. You can go to garagegymathlete.com, experience what real training looks like. You can sign up for a free trial. And we'd love to have you, but that's it for this one. Remember, if you don't kill comfort, we'll kill you. To the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. If you want to learn more, go to garagegymathlete.com. You can learn about our training. Let us send you a copy of our book, The Garage Gym Athlete, or you can even get featured on the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. Thanks for listening.